Hello, everyone. I'm excited to share Rochelle with you today. Rochelle comes from Yoga in Action, and I heard about Rochelle through ChildLight Yoga, and I know she is an expert in the area of working with children with diverse needs. So I wanted to talk about this further with you, Rochelle, because this is something that we hear from our community is how do we effectively work with children with diverse needs. Not only how can we recognize, but what are the benefits and all that. So before we get into that, please share with our community here, who are you, what kind of brought you to Yoga in Action and all the work that you've been up to.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, first of all, so much for having me. I appreciate having the time. I always love to share the work that I've been doing and the work of Yoga in Action, and working with both the children and adults with disabilities, special needs, diverse needs has been my passion for many years. I've been teaching yoga for 25 years. Started off in the Ashtanga tradition, and did that for a couple of years. And then I was introduced to both Kripalu yoga and Vini yoga, and it totally changed the trajectory for how I taught. Both my personal practice and my teaching changed, and I became really focused on yoga being individualized and really meeting the needs of the person on the mat, both including myself and others who I've been involved with. So I began focusing on working with people with chronic health disabilities, chronic health conditions, both physical and mental health challenges, and did that for several years, became certified as a yoga therapist. And really, my passion has been to make yoga accessible to anyone.
Yeah.
And then during that whole process, I became connected. Well, first I created a training, My Own Mobilities Yoga, a training to help others teach yoga to kids with diverse abilities. And then became connected with ChildLight and worked with a couple of colleagues to create trainings for kids and adults with developmental, intellectual, physical disabilities, and also created a training for trauma-informed yoga along with another colleague at ChildLight.
Yeah,
and during that whole time, I also founded Yoga in Action. And Yoga in Action is a nonprofit that we're based in the seacoast of New Hampshire, but now serving people from all over the country because we have some Zoom classes available. So folks in 26 states and even as far as India. And we serve individuals who are living with cancer and their caregivers. We have a class for diverse abilities. We've also been in county jails, served individuals who are recovering from trauma and in recovery or seeking recovery from substance misuse.
Amazing.
And then
Rochelle,
most recently started with seniors and veterans this year.
oh my gosh, what an amazing background you have, Rochelle. I want to highlight some of the things that you say. So many new teachers, whether they're teaching adults or children, so many of us are thinking about, how do we find our niche? And I think sometimes it finds you, right? And so it sounds like you were in with your own practice, taking training, and you sort of found this passion. And that's been kind of like feels like a thread through everything that you've done. And you've just worked with, people and adults and children and training. And it's kind of gone from there. But the core has been the same, and I really love that you're clear on what you're doing. Some of us are some teachers are multi-passionate, but I feel like you're just like found it early, right?
Yeah, I knew very early that yoga should be available to everybody. That became really clear. And in my practice at the time, when I had that realization, I remember being in a yoga class one day, and I had a wrist injury from the yoga. And my teacher saying, "Do you ever wonder why we do this?" And I collapsed on my wrist, and I was like, "Yeah, why do we do this?" So we should be adjusting our practice based on how we are in any given day, let alone how you are throughout your life. So it became clear early, and then I was still teaching like many classes a week, but I was doing a lot of work in centers that provided services to individuals with disabilities. And I realized as I was teaching about 13 classes a week that those 4 or 5 classes and private sessions that I were doing were the ones that I really looked forward to. And so that's where I gravitated, and I made a really it was a pretty quick adjustment
Mm.
about 12 years ago, and dropped really all of my traditional yoga classes
Mm.
and really made this shift.
I think that's really the takeaway, Rochelle, here is for new teachers is to really follow your passion, but also things that you're good at and that you look forward to doing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we talk about the intersection of, what our passion is, what our skill is, and then what the market will pay or what the audience is
Mm-hmm.
asking for. And you really hit those right in the middle, those three things. So I love that. So going back to your classes, what have you been seeing are the benefits? Because I think as teachers, I was an elementary school teacher. The thing that made me want to become a teacher when I was young is watching children grow and learn,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so for you, what are you seeing as the benefits working with this population of what yoga and mindfulness can bring to them?
Well, I think the benefits are they're the same as with anybody. We've got
Mhm.
physical benefits, we have benefits of the brain, psychosocial benefits, benefits for even though there's a ripple effect that goes into the community with caregivers, family members, peers. And that's the same for for everybody, and that's why we come to yoga in the first place, is we know that it can help us feel better physically and emotionally, mentally. The physical benefits, I feel it's one thing to really remember when we're working with diverse populations is that all of the systems of the body are affected, and it's not just building muscle and flexibility.
Mhm.
But that said, when we're working with kids who have specific needs, we can tailor the practices to meet those needs. So we can build core strength and stability in the joints for kids who may be low tone. And then on the other hand, if we have a child who has cerebral palsy and might have spasticity, we can focus on the flexibility and those kinds of more gentle practices that might ease some of the discomfort that they feel in their bodies.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
for children with autism, the yoga practices can help support digestion and elimination, which is something that's very common in kids on the autism spectrum. We can tailor practices to build both gross motor skills and fine motor skills. Bilateral integration is huge in this population, and can really beneficial for cognitive function. So we meet the kids where they are, but also look at what kinds of tools can we give them to help
Mhm.
assist on a day-to-day basis. So it goes beyond the mat. Um, and then there's the emotional, the cognitive benefits, tools for self-regulation. Um, it's helping with anxiety and depression, which often go hand in hand with some of the children that I've worked with some of their conditions, their diagnoses, but they're also diagnosed on their own independently. So
Yeah.
can work with that as well.
I think what you're speaking here too, Rochelle, is a reminder to all of us that yoga encompasses so much more than the physical
Mhm.
postures, is what we see here most
Yeah.
in the West, right? That you're incorporating mindfulness and breathing techniques and meditations and body awareness, whether those poses are specifically flexibility or core or balancing or whatever. So I think that's a reminder that we've got such a huge toolkit, right? Such a variety of this ancient wisdom to pull from to be able to serve students. So thinking about, if you had a room full of other educators, special education educators,
Mhm.
what would you sort of say are your three top tips for effectively teaching this population? Because what you're talking about, if you've got 20 students, say, who all have diverse needs, how in the world do you cater to all those needs together, right? And so what are you sort of saying are your kind of your three top tips?
I would say the first one is to meet the children where they are and know that you might come up with a lesson plan or an intention for a class, right? That's what we're told when we go through our training is like, got to come up with your plan. What's your intention? You got it all written out there.
Right.
But then it's really important to follow the lead of the students. And sometimes that might be one student in a class. And following that student's need to make sure that the class can stay in control and safe for everybody involved. There was one student I was working with some years ago, and he had autism. And we were in the middle of a yoga class in a circle of probably 10 or so students in the room. And he kept moving off his mat
Mm,
and walking away. And it was one of those things that normally it would be okay a couple of times and I'd guide him back. Um, but he was really agitated that day. And so I tried to guide him back to his mat and he wasn't managing it very well.
mm,
And there were others in the class. And so instead of continuing on with my plan, we just dropped to the floor and everybody got down on the floor and did floor postures and did some movement, some vestibular stuff. We did some circles and things on our mats and allowed him to stay really grounded. And
mm,
he was fully participating
mm,
for the rest of the class because I was willing to make those adjustments. And I learned afterwards that had been upset because his father was out of town, and every time his father goes out
mm.
of town, he gets agitated, and so he just was so uncomfortable in his skin that day. So we just found a way for him to be more comfortable. So that's one thing is meeting kids where they are.
I love that
Um,
story too, Rochelle. I want to highlight too, because it sounds like you had a group of children and one child was on the spectrum. One child had particular needs that was going on. But what you pivoted to do helped all the children, right? So it wasn't like,
Absolutely.
yeah, it was meeting his needs while also serving the rest of the class as well.
Yes, and there was no reason to single him out
Hmm.
or to draw attention to why we made any shift. We just changed.
Yeah,
They
I
didn't
love
know
that.
what my plan was for the day.
Right.
So even though they know, have a sense of what we're going to do in any particular class, there was
Mhm.
no reason for anybody to know that we were making a switch.
I love that. And that can only come from you being in tune, right? So meeting the children
Absolutely.
where at, it's about grounding yourself and having yourself be available to hold that space for the children, right?
Yes, and watching everybody in the class throughout the entire class is something that I've always felt was really important.
Mm,
Teach with your eyes wide open.
yes,
So
right.
your eyes and your mind wide
Right.
open.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, another piece that I think is really important is as far as creating the relationships in the classroom is letting the children know that they're seen.
Mhm.
Making sure that, especially when we have like more challenging behaviors or students who may be nonverbal or again with autism who might have trouble with joint connection and looking at a teacher in the face is um, really being engaged with them. So when they come into the class, greeting every student, regardless of whether they're going to say anything back to you or not, let them know that you're happy to see them and welcoming them is really important. And a lot of times, often these kids with diverse abilities don't always get that
Mm,
attention. They can be overlooked, and making sure that they know that they're welcome. Really, it's helped me create relationships that have lasted honestly decades now.
yeah.
So there's a couple of former students of mine who I see out in the world now, working and might bump into them and they're still like run right up to me, and as their yoga teacher. And so we're making, improving lives by letting people be seen
Yeah.
and letting them feel
I
important.
I love that. I love it because I'm thinking about our school system, right? I work as a teacher sub as well. And the curriculum is so vigorous that, they're, I'm not saying the teachers are doing a phenomenal job for what they have and the pressures the demands that they have, but it's so fast, right? It's so fast. There's so much to accomplish that I do feel that being a yoga teacher, especially outside of the classroom, also there's this flexibility and creativity and connection that we can provide as a
Mm-hmm.
sort of a softer landing for some of these
Absolutely.
children who just really want to be included and have a sense of belonging and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they want to connect, right? And they don't want to be seen that they're different or that yeah, I just think that's really important to have a figure, an adult figure in their lives who are going to see them for who they are, see them beyond what others might see as their disabilities, so to speak, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
physical or mental or whatever, right? Or for some folks, like my daughter, they don't look different, but her
Mm-hmm.
brain is works in a different way. And for her, school is hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas to have someone like you to be able to see her and get her at a deeper
Yeah.
level, what a gift. What a gift that is. Oh, I
Yeah.
love
There's
that.
nothing more important than that human connection.
Yeah. And it's so simple, Rochelle.
Mm-hmm.
It's so simple. Like we could, I think sometimes as yoga teachers or whatever, we make things more complicated than they need to be. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, like you said, we've got a plan and we want to get through the plan, but this is the opportunity, different than in other places where children show up, that we do have the flexibility. We do have that flexibility. The plan is just a plan, right?
Yeah,
It doesn't
absolutely.
have to be followed. Yeah, I love that. And what's your third tip for us?
Oh, third tip. So self-study, I think, like if you're coming in as a yoga teacher, and we might not always, and there were so many times when I didn't have a whole lot of information
Mm,
about my students and or their challenges. And so I do a lot of research
mm,
um, on various diagnoses and try to learn as much about it that I could about the background, the
yeah,
background about what people are living with
yeah,
is more important than how we're going to address any issues. It's having an understanding of what their experience might be is
right.
I think that's the most important, that's a place to start is we have to,
Mm,
have a sense. And that's the same if it's kids with autism or Down syndrome, or if it's an individual who's experienced trauma or is living with cancer, is having a sense of what that is
mm,
before we go in and expect to to teach them, what we know. We have to have a sense of what it is they might be experiencing, so we can be sensitive to that and again open to it and accepting um, and okay with it.
yeah,
To not be afraid of some of the adverse experiences that someone might have.
right. Yeah, I love that. And I think that speaks to a lot of empathy, right? And connecting and being okay with whatever is there for the child at that moment, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it can be, like you said about afraid, I think it can be overwhelming and quite frankly scary
Mm-hmm.
or nerve wracking or, a lot of anxiety around well, what
Yeah.
happens if, the child isn't even, no matter how much you study, there's still working with the children in front of you, right? And so if
Mm-hmm.
you're seeing these big behaviors that you weren't expecting, again, like you said, it comes back to how do you ground yourself in the moment? How
Mm-hmm.
do you make it not about you? How do you serve them? How do you hold the space? Right. But at the end of the day, you're planting a seed. You're to be of service to that child. Right. And also help them know the boundaries. Right. This isn't like a free
Yeah.
for all. Right. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
be able to hold that space, hold those boundaries and help them see what is expected in in society, right?
Mhm.
So they can't sort of come into your class and be wild and crazy, but then, expect something different in the rest of the world. So I think that's really interesting about, yeah, having empathy, but also sort of holding space
Yep.
for this population.
And setting up high expectations.
Yeah.
I mean, we have boundaries, and there should still be expectations, even for kiddos that have lots of behaviors.
Mhm.
That they might have the behaviors. It could be part of, it is part of who they are and their challenges based on their diagnosis. But we
Yeah.
can set really high expectations and encourage that growth. And again, that's one of the benefits of yoga is self-regulation and creating more focus or developing focus. And those things are things that we can encourage while still allowing the space for kids to be themselves.
Yeah. And I love that speaks exactly to that point about the self-study because you're having a better understanding of what they can control, what they can't control.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's physically or mentally, but you can then depends on the age of the child, even be speaking to them about,
Mm-hmm.
especially I think with children who have mental challenges or mental differences, let's say, not even challenges, but they, like I said, they don't necessarily look different, but you can see, with ADHD, for example, or autism, there's a spectrum, right,
Mm-hmm.
of dysregulation. So what is it that they can control in the moment? How can they, is that a fixed mindset? Is that something you can work with in the moment? Or is it something that you can sort of embrace and look at a different way and reframe it? I think that sometimes we forget about how children aren't wanting to be behaving this way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so they ultimately want to be working in a space of being expected, but they're doing the best they can at that moment, right? And I think that can be really tough when some of these children are shut down or
Mm-hmm.
suppressed or yelled at or whatever, that they aren't really being seen for what they can control in the moment. Would you agree?
I agree. And I think all of us are kind of the same way, right? We're
Yeah,
all trying to do the best that we can in
right.
every moment.
Yeah.
And the more that we acknowledge that as human beings and
Mm,
living in this world and making our way through our lives is we're not always going to be perfect. We're not always going to be saying the right thing.
yeah.
And how do we work with that? Is if we assume the best of everyone to start and then work with the places that could use a little tweaking gently but
Yeah.
firmly, then we can all grow from that.
Yeah. What was that? Now, do you have a story to tell us about maybe one of the students that you've worked with over the years?
One of them who I was just thinking of as you were talking, when we talk about um, kids being dysregulated, there was a little boy that I worked with for uh, several years, actually. A lot of my private clients, we've worked together for many years. And when we first met, um, talk about not knowing what to do and being
Mm,
scared and nervous. He was running around the room, literally up on the furniture, all
mm,
over the place. He had a lot of sensory differences, and had a cotton ball. And his cotton ball he had won this like, little teeny cotton ball, and he was rubbing it all over his face and his body. It was soothing for him. And he would pick up little specks of dirt and lint and stuff, whatever he could find on the floor, and put it in his mouth.
mm,
Um, he was largely nonverbal at the time. A lot of times he would come in, he would cry. Sometimes he'd come in, and I remember he just came and grabbed my yoga cards, ripped them up, and like tossed them in the air. And I was like,
mm.
what?
Right.
Um, but he came for years, like regular weekly sessions for years, and over time developed better self-regulation. We started to interact with the yoga cards verbally. So we'd hold up a card and he wasn't talking, but we'd start with like, yes or no, would you like to do this posture? And then yes or no. And so he would start with that, and then over time started saying the name of the pose. He'd hold it up, then I'd say it, he'd repeat it. So we started um, engaging that way, so engaging verbally. And again, it was over time, and certainly yoga wasn't the only thing that he did. It wasn't the only intervention, the only therapy. He was in school, and I'm sure, and I know he was on some medications, but there was a lot, we put a lot of time in together. And his family happened to be Indian. His dad came in one day and asked me to teach him a sun salutation.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't say this out loud, but I was
Right,
like,
right.
what? I was like, all right, well, we can do that. And I figured it was going to take weeks. I figured it would take several sessions for him to do a sun salutation. And so I paused and thought about how to best do it. And I figured with him that just trying to make it very regimented would be
Mhm.
helpful and like one step at a time. So I wrote up this little chant, and we did it together, like one move at a time. And at the end of the session, he did it. So we went out into the foyer, and I was like, show your dad what you did. And
Mhm.
it was just amazing. So, like, that was one of just a really, for me, super inspiring
Mhm.
moment where, on so many levels, I mean, first of all, that his father trusted enough to ask me to do something, felt comfortable enough to ask me to do something like that, and which was really important to him and his culture and his connection with yoga. It was so that was really important to him, and then so proud of my little guy that he was focused enough and interested enough to do it.
Yeah. I think what
And
that story speaks to, Rochelle, is the longevity. Like this is a long game, right? So
yeah.
yoga's been around for thousands of years. There's no hurry, right?
Mhm.
There's no hurry to have a transformation. I mean, we all remember when we have our own practices. It might have been years before we felt that real miracle moment, right? That
Mhm.
has kept us coming back. So I think that's a reminder, that and the other piece of that is the seed that we're planting. Like you never know. I mean, in all these stories that we talk to our community about, almost every single one of them is about children who you least expect are getting
Mhm.
anything out of it, are the
Mhm.
ones who really are in their own way. There's
Yep.
no, again, there's no rule book about how to participate or how to engage with yoga, right? It's this ripple effect. It's in our energy space. It's in who we be, right? And so just him being in your presence was super powerful. And when
Mhm.
you pushed him, it was probably just the right time, and there he had it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, what a great story. I love that. So thinking about that, then what advice do you have for teachers who, have diverse needs in their classes, right? And they're
Okay.
quite frankly overwhelmed with some of the behavior issues or maybe physical, mental challenges that might be present. Maybe there's a whole list of accommodations they have to look at, or they want to think about how to engage these children, and they just don't necessarily have, a degree in special education, for
Mhm.
example. Sort of what advice do you have for these teachers who want to do the right thing to serve needs and just don't know how to start?
I think one of the first things I would say is to ask questions. So if you're coming in as a yoga teacher into a space that you're not familiar with and you may not know the children, or the dynamics of the classroom, is to try to ask as many questions as you can, and with this intention of learning and understanding what to expect. So you can check with the classroom teacher, with parents, direct support providers, and get a sense of what the kids might respond best to,
Mhm.
and at the same time, and even more importantly, the things that might set them off, and kind of instigate some behaviors that might not be
Yeah,
ideal for
right.
the class. Um, so that's one, I think, really important point, is if you don't know, then get as much
Yes.
information as you can. And again, that's something that I had to do a lot
Right.
over the years, is just gather the info that I could. Um,
And I think about that as a
And then,
teacher too. When we're coming in as teacher subs, it's the same thing. The first thing I
mhm,
say to the teacher is, anyone I should be mindful of, and what works for them. That's exactly the same kind of thing. It's just general teacher, good teacher knowledge, right? To understand
mhm.
who's in front of you and how you can best serve
Yeah,
them.
it's the same with all of the classes that we teach at Yoga in Action. If we're substituting, and I sub um, many of the classes, and when I'm going into a new space, we want to know about the space that we're going into. We want to know about
Yeah.
who's likely going to be in the room, and any information that we might need. It's so we're well prepared.
Yes.
Um, the other thing I think is, if you find yourself you use the word overwhelmed. If you find yourself overwhelmed, you go
Yeah.
back to your own practices, your own skills, and get yourself grounded. Take a few breaths.
Yeah.
Start off gently. Sometimes maybe you've walked into a classroom ready to teach a yoga class and you're walking into utter chaos.
Mm.
So taking that time at the beginning of the class to ground yourself is as important as anything that we're going to share with our students.
Love it. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time. So, Rochelle, how do we find you online, and how do we connect with you if our community would like to speak to you more or have any questions?
Well, you can email me at rochelle.jewell@yogainaction.org. And we have a website, yogainaction.org. And actually, if you email right from that website, it goes to me. The info general mailbox comes to me, so I'll see it. I do have a Facebook page, My Own Abilities Yoga. But generally, just coming right to the Yoga in Action page is easy way to find me. And then you can learn more about the programs that we have in the community. As I mentioned, we've got some Zoom classes. So those are available. They're free and accessible classes available to many people.
Excellent. And your training is available on your website or just through ChildLight as well?
Yep, ChildLight, the trainings that I created are still available on the ChildLight website.
Great.
And I'm no longer teaching for ChildLight. It's been a few years, or maybe just like a year and a half. But those trainings are still out there, and it's a great way to learn about teaching children with diverse abilities and trauma-informed yoga for all ages. And really, the diverse abilities training as well, geared towards kids, but it's transitioned through the entire lifespan. Lots of background. A lot of the research, which I said that we should do when we're working in these populations, there's a lot of that
Great.
in there too. So lots of great tips about working with different diagnoses.
Awesome. Oh, thank you so much, Rochelle. You have such great energy, and I really appreciate you being here and sharing all your wisdom. Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much. Wonderful to meet you. I appreciate it.